The agent carefully pushed the door open to discover his colleague seriously injured and barely alive. The hard drive contained a list of NATO agents that had been compromised. The consequences would be unpredictable if this list were exposed. Bond immediately set off in pursuit. At this time, another agent, Eve, driving a Land Rover Defender 110 double cab pickup, just arrived. They quickly aimed straight at the Audi in front and chased it, thanks to its strong off-road performance. This classic SUV helped them maneuver flexibly through narrow alleys. When traveling parallel to the Audi, Bond took the opportunity to suddenly turn the steering wheel sharply, directly flipping the Audi over. The mercenary assassin Patrice stepped down from the Audi holding a modified Beretta 92 FS. Equipped with a round magazine of 50 rounds, he began a gunfight with Bond's Walther PPK. The standard Walther PPK only has 6 bullets. Taking advantage of Bond's time to reload, Patrice stole a police motorbike and fled. Seeing that, Bond immediately rushed to the nearest motorbike without saying a word and drove straight after Patrice. Both of these motorcycles were Honda CRF 250Rs. Bond's bike had been converted into a cargo motorbike for a Turkish street vendor, but still retained the high-strength characteristics of the original chassis. They took turns running up the stairs, chasing each other across the rooftops of Istanbul, passing from one roof to another, and then plunging into a narrow market. Eve outside also did not give up. She took advantage of the performance of the off-road vehicle to zigzag through the streets to find the fastest route. Together with Bond, she stopped Patrice on a bridge. Seeing the situation, Patrice decisively abandoned the bike and jumped straight from the bridge, landing on the roof of a passing train. Bond could not give up. He revved the motorbike and took off straight, broke through the railing, and then successfully let go and climbed onto the roof of the train. The two continued to exchange gunfire, just an excavator apart, but Bond quickly ran out of bullets. He looked around, climbed into the driver's cab of the excavator next to him, and turned it around. Patrice in front reloaded and continued to shoot at Bond. Unfortunately, Bond was hit by a few stray bullets, but he did not stop and drove the excavator over each Volkswagen Beetle in front to move forward. The assassin realized that all the bullets were stopped by the excavator's large bucket. He decisively shot at the track below. However, it was too late. Bond promptly grabbed the train ahead, quickly climbed out of the cabin and got into that train car. At that moment, the train rushed into the tunnel. The darkness instantly swallowed everything. When the light returned to the train car, Bond suddenly appeared behind Patrice. They immediately started wrestling. The punches hitting the opponent's body created a constant dull sound. Bond reached out and tried to snatch the hard drive around Patrice's neck, but the tunnel came again. The struggle in the dark continued with neither gaining an absolute advantage. Outside, Eve saw that there was no road ahead, so she stopped and readied her sniper rifle. But as soon as the train left the tunnel, she couldn't get a clear shot at the assassin because the two were always entwined. Seeing that the train was about to enter the tunnel again, Eve wouldn't have another chance. The command center explicitly ordered Eve to open fire. Eve eventually missed, and her shot caused Bond to fall. The assassin and the hard drive successfully escaped. This is the 23rd film in the 007 franchise, Skyfall, and also the third work in which Daniel Craig plays Bond. The cold water engulfed Bond. In the MI6 command room in London, M quietly looked out the window. No one knew that this missed shot would not only push the list of NATO agents into a major crisis, but also begin a long and bitter return for the man with the codename 007, a journey of loyalty, loss, and self-salvation in the midst of life and death. As for the escaped Patrice, he was just the first cog in the Skyfall plot, a storm that swept through the intelligence community that had only just begun. 3 months later, M personally drafted Bond's high commendation, but in her heart she still held hope. The next day, her official vehicle appeared on the streets of London. The car's elegant body lines and spacious rear seat space clearly demonstrated her official status. Due to the loss of the agent list hard drive this time, MI6 Chief Mallory had a meeting with M. First, he expressed his and the country's highest respect for her contributions over the years. She would be honored with a pension and an honorable retirement. She replied that she knew she couldn't do it forever, but she would never leave the agency at its most difficult time. But on the way back, Assistant Tanner received a phone call. Someone was trying to decrypt the stolen hard drive. Not only that, they had also broken into MI6's firewall and sent a video mocking her with a challenging text, "Think about your sins." As they were rushing back to headquarters, the car was stopped by police officers. M walked out of the car and asked the police officer if he didn't recognize the car. But at that moment, a loud explosion suddenly rang out in the distance, from the direction of the British military intelligence headquarters. The scene changes to a small island where Bond is living his drunken days. 3 months ago, he was saved by a woman at sea but did not choose to return. M's decisive order to shoot that day is something Bond can never forget. It was a lack of trust. However, when he saw the news on TV about the MI6 headquarters being bombed, he could no longer stand aside. M somberly at the innocent subordinates who had sacrificed themselves and felt extremely pained. When returning home, she suddenly discovered a shadow behind her. She immediately recognized that it was Bond and couldn't suppress her blame. In which corner did you die? Bond understands her choice, but cannot forgive that he was the price to pay. Even so, he still returned, but because he had been missing for several months, according to protocol, he was forced to go through a re-evaluation process. The next day, she personally took him to the new headquarters, which used to be a secret underground command bunker for the military during World War II. On the walls, there are still faint bullet marks from old air defense exercises, and the heavy concrete dome still seems to enclose the slow breath of the old battlefield. Self-imposed exile had exhausted his physical condition. During the fitness test, he only climbed halfway when his arms began to tremble. The old wound in his shoulder was like a stuck cog. Every movement brought sharp pain. When it came to the shooting part, his hand holding the gun trembled uncontrollably. The bullets fired could only trace the outline around the target. The most ironic thing was the psychological assessment. Words like resentment and self-doubt reflected the brokenness hidden deep beneath his cold exterior. M clutched the report and told Bond that the final result was just enough to pass and he could return to work. Even though Mallory expressed his congratulations, he still expressed doubts about Bond's ability. He asked him why he returned. This was clearly a great opportunity for him to live a normal life. Because field agents who can retire safely are extremely rare, he bluntly said that now is the time for young people. Saying that you are incompetent is not shameful. Only being unable to accept it is truly shameful. M interrupted Mallory's sarcasm. She knows Bond's pride all too well and understands MI6's difficult situation even more at this time. A crisis of confidence is taking hold. There is no one else who can be entrusted with this responsibility other than this old blunt sword. She said as long as she was in charge of MI6, he still had the right to choose his agent. After returning, Bond looked in the mirror and used a pair of sterilized tweezers to pick the remaining bullet fragments straight out of the flesh and skin of his shoulder. It was a relic left from the time he was missing. He handed over the blood-stained bullet fragment to the analyst. Very quickly, the results showed that it was a piece of military-grade depleted uranium ammunition, which has extremely low production and is expensive. Worldwide, only no more than 5 people can own this type of ammunition. What's more important is that Tanner used connections from the CIA to investigate and discovered that Patrice, who escaped from Bond a few months ago, was flying to Shanghai in 2 days and might be aiming for a new target. M immediately ordered Bond to go to Shanghai and wait for orders. Before leaving, he had to go to the National Art Museum to meet the new quartermaster, Dr. Q. Bond went to the museum according to the address. Even though there were 10 minutes left until the appointment time, his eyes were drawn to a painting in the middle of the exhibition hall. It depicted a warship being towed away. The warship that once sailed the waves on the open ocean, now lying on the water being led to the dismantling yard. The golden light of the sunset shining on the hull but unable to brighten its ruin. Bond looked at the picture as if he saw himself. Once the invincible 007, now even with a shaky gun he had to cope with old wounds. Right after that, the young quartermaster, Dr. Q, sat down next to him. Q's youth surprised Bond. The answer was that age does not guarantee performance, and youth also does not guarantee inexperience. He was in casual clothes and couldn't figure out what to do. The friendship between the two started from these exchanges. Dr. Q gave Bond his passport and plane ticket and then gave him a box. Inside was a customized version of the Walter PPK pistol, which is also a tribute to the original 007. The classic image of Sean Connery holding this gun is deeply imprinted in the hearts of fans. This is a high-tech weapon in the movie. The gun body integrates a fingerprint recognition system. Only when Bond holds the gun does the crosshair turn green and activate the trigger, effectively preventing the weapon from falling into enemy hands. Also included was a standard radio transmitter. No display, no complex functions. It could only emit a single frequency signal to alert MI6 to Bond's location. These two items are both a tribute to traditional agent gear and a concrete representation of the collision between old and new eras. Each piece implicitly matches Bond's transformation and the film's core theme. The scene shifts to Shanghai. Bond quickly received news from headquarters. Miss Chisi would arrive at the airport at 9 p.m. Bond disguised himself and closely followed his opponent to the Shanghai World Financial Center. Bond activated his gun right in the car. At this time, Miss Chisi finished dealing with a security officer and pulled that person aside. Bond immediately followed. When the opponent's helicopter took off, he quickly ran over and grabbed onto the skid. The target floor was floor 67. Bond, who was hanging, couldn't help but shake from his injured arm. Then he hung from the outside to the inside of the building, carefully looking for the target. At this time, Miss Chisi used a tool to cut a hole in the glass and assembled a Finnish Seiko TRG-42 sniper rifle. This is a military-grade weapon specifically designed for high-precision long-range sniping. The cylindrical silencer is installed.
At the front of the gun barrel, she removed the glass cutting tool and placed the sniper rifle in the round hole. At that moment, a man in the opposite building sat down. The woman next to him seemed to glance this way. Miss Chisi suddenly pulled the trigger and killed the man with one shot. It was also at this time that she discovered Bond through the reflection. The two struggled in the dark, breaking the glass window. In the end, Bond was more skilled. Miss Chisi was flipped over and Bond caught her. He urgently asked whose hands the list was in, but in the end his arms couldn't hold on anymore, so Patrice fell. Bond sat down helplessly but discovered the woman opposite was looking at him, then turned and walked away. Bond took items from Patrice and found a Macau casino chip. Bond, dressed in an elegant gentleman's outfit, arrived in Macau. He entered the casino without hesitation. Agent Eve was also there to support him. He showed the chip and asked to exchange it for cash. Very quickly, a burly man brought a neatly stacked box containing 2 million euros. Apparently, Patrice, who was just killed, was a hired professional assassin. The reason Bond came to receive money so blatantly was to lure the mastermind out. Sure enough, not long after, a beauty named Severine proactively approached Bond. He immediately recognized this person as the woman in the opposite building in Shanghai. The two of them drank a glass together. Bond did not hide the fact that he killed Patrice and asked to meet her master. Severine didn't say anything else and stood up to leave, but Bond held her back. During the conversation, he realized that Severine's bodyguards were not protecting her but monitoring her. Through the tattoo on her wrist, Bond quickly deduced that she was once a prostitute who had been lured away by the mastermind. But he discovered that she had just escaped the wolf's mouth and was already deep in the tiger's den. He assured Severine that he could help her escape and gain freedom, as long as she let him to meet the person behind it all. Severine was amused by his arrogance, but still told him that as soon as she left, assassins would come to kill him. If he survived, he should come find her on the Chimera boat at Pier Number 7. The boat would depart in 1 hour. After Severine left, Bond turned around and discovered 3 assassins immediately emerging from the darkness to surround him. He lifted his lips and smiled coldly, completely disregarding these people. The months of self-imposed exile had filled him with pent-up aggression. He could just borrow this confrontation to warm up his muscles and bones. But after a while of fighting, he was pushed into an enclosure. It turned out this was an arena where Komodo dragons were roaring. At this time, an assassin took the gun Bond had dropped and aimed straight at his chest, thinking it could easily kill him. But unexpectedly, when he squeezed the trigger, the gun did not fire. The next moment, the assassin was pulled away from behind by a Komodo dragon. His pitiful screams were immediately swallowed up. At the same time, the boat departure time had arrived. Severine still saw no sign of Bond. She couldn't help but be disappointed. But while she was bathing, a pair of strong arms hugged her from behind, and the two began a night of passion. Far away in London, M was facing the most terrifying nightmare of her career. The mastermind behind the theft of the agent list had begun carrying out public executions online. The names and photos of several agents were blatantly published globally. Within a few short hours, news channels around the world scrolled those chilling images. Undercover spies operating in the Far East were repeatedly assassinated, like heavy hammer blows. This news struck straight at M's heart. MI6's crisis of confidence had completely exploded. On the other hand, the boat carrying Bond and Severine was heading towards a remote island. Taking advantage of a moment when no one was paying attention, Bond secretly pressed the radio transmitter that Dr. Q had given him. He knew this island was absolutely not simple. In reality, it is Hashima Island, located about 15 kilometers southwest of the port of Nagasaki in Japan. Once prosperous thanks to coal mining, now it has become a world-famous ruin, a true ghost town. In the film, the crew almost recreated its desolation. As soon as they set foot on the island and entered the abandoned architectural area, Bond and Severine were ambushed by assassins. Both had their hands tied behind their backs and were led to a large hall. Finally, the person behind everything appeared, but it started with a story. This person was MI6's former agent, Silva. He used to do intelligence work in Hong Kong from 1986 to 1997 under M. Back then, Silva was M's favorite. Even Bond couldn't compare. Silva looked at Bond with no hostility on his face. On the contrary, there was a strange familiarity. As for Bond remaining so loyal to M, Silva only found it ironic. He told Bond that M always deceived him. He then opened the assessment report when Bond returned to work. The psychological assessment noted clear signs of trauma and instability. The physical examination recommended his termination as an active agent. Is this not betrayal? She knows you're not capable enough. Silva's voice was full of excitement. She knew he wasn't ready, but still let him come here. This wasn't treason? What is? Without waiting for Bond to answer, Silva stepped forward and pulled down Bond's collar, so that the wound from the gunshot M ordered was exposed on his shoulder. This scar is proof, he said, using his fingertips to brush over Bond's star, his voice full of sadness. She can sacrifice you.
Without hesitation, we are on the same front line. After that, Silva confidently untied Bond and led him to a covered platform, at which point Severin was escorted by an assassin. On top was also placed a glass of wine. Silva took out a pair of dueling pistols from the 19th century and forced Bond into a life-or-death gamble. This muzzle-loading gun had a fake but ceremonial loading process. Silva told Bond to shoot first to see who could hit the glass on Severin's head. Bond took aim at his one-night lover but never pulled the trigger. Then he intentionally missed. But unexpectedly, Silva was extremely cruel. He sarcastically got bored and shot Severin dead. An angry Bond suddenly took action. After overpowering Silva's subordinates, he took a Glock 17 pistol. This gun is famous for its high reliability and large magazine capacity, helping Bond successfully fight back against his enemies. Apparently, his shooting skills had recovered. Silva was still extremely confident. Could it be that Bond alone thought he could hand him over to M? At this moment, several military helicopters surrounded the island. Silva was escorted to MI6 and imprisoned in a transparent glass cell. M came to interrogate Silva in a heavy mood. Silva explained his purpose. My enemy is MI6. It turned out that Silva once fell into the hands of an enemy organization. He was tortured for 5 months to keep the secret, waiting for M to rescue him. But in the end, he realized it was all a joke, because M betrayed him. His life or death meant nothing, so in extreme pain and despair, he broke the cyanide capsule hidden in his teeth. But the more ironic thing is that it was not cyanide at all, but extremely corrosive sulfuric acid. Silva did not die, but was left with his horrified appearance. Watching M turn and leave, Silva put on his dentures and smiled, but there were tears in his eyes. M, who never explained, still stopped and told him that Silva used to be an excellent agent, but worked more and more beyond his limits, even attacking the network of a country that should not be touched in exchange for 6 agents. M had to disavow him. Afterwards, Tanner escorted M to Parliament to participate in a questioning session about MI6. Bond and Dr. Q checked Silva's computer. The only thing on the screen was a London Underground map. The simple lines hid an indescribable strangeness. The two were studying the map, trying to decipher Silva's plan, when suddenly all of MI6's security doors opened at the same time. The red alarm lights flashed frantically in the hallway. Bond's heart tightened, immediately realizing something was wrong. He ran as fast as he could towards the cell, but when he broke through the door, the inside was empty. Silva had long since escaped.
At this point, Dr. Q was horrified to realize that Silva's computer contained a virus that had silently infiltrated the MI6 network. The security doors were manipulated by the virus to open. Bond didn't have time to regret. He followed the cell's underground tunnel to the subway station. Here, people were so crowded that it was impossible to lock on the target. Dr. Q carefully searched each screen and finally discovered that Silva was disguised as a police officer, but at this time the subway had already started moving. Bond quickly sprinted and jumped onto the speeding train, surprising the old couple next to him. Bond walked through each train car looking for traces of Silva. Looking at the layout of the train cars, he suddenly realized that the other person's target was M. Sure enough, Silva stepped out of the train car at the arrival station. Bond quickly chased after him. This chase was extremely intense. Even the large crowd couldn't stop their speed. Bond chased into the subway tunnel, cautiously advancing with a gun in hand. Finally, he discovered Silva waiting. Unexpectedly, the other person didn't panic and said that he would reward him a little. The next second, he pressed a button. A sudden explosion rang out. After the subway station exploded, Silva took advantage of the chaos to leave in a police car. He turned the steering wheel and headed straight to the hearing that M was attending. At the hearing, parliamentarians voiced doubts in opposition to the intelligence organization. Her eyes were dim and determined, and she spoke slowly. She strongly rejected the argument, stating that the world she sees is different and scary, full of hidden enemies who no longer operate openly in the light. She emphasized that MI saints must survive and fight in the darkness of a world that has lost transparency. At the same time, she called on parliamentarians to put aside prejudice against the organization. Immediately after that, she quoted verses from Tennyson to protect the reputation of the intelligence organization and also her own dignity. This poem also seems to narrate the current state of England. Courage is gone. When the verses had not yet faded, Silva suddenly rushed in and stared at her slowly. She never backed down. At the pivotal moment, Mallory, standing next to her, promptly pushed her down. Unfortunately, he was hit in the arm by a bullet. At this time, Bond also promptly ran over. The two sides fought fiercely. Meanwhile, the wounded Edith and Mallory also joined the fight. Bond took the opportunity to shoot and explode the fire extinguisher next to him. The white mist immediately covered the entire meeting room. Silva's vision was completely obscured. He quickly turned around and left. By the time Bond came out the back door, Silva had disappeared. Very quickly, M was gently escorted downstairs. As soon as she got into the car, Bond sat in the driver's seat and stepped on the gas pedal, speeding away. He wanted to use the person he cared about the most as bait to set a trap that would
make Silva leave, but never return. Bond contacted Dr. Q. He wanted to disappear with M, but leave a mark, ensuring only Silva could notice. Obviously, this was not an official order, but Dr. Q agreed. Bond then took her to a secret garage. Pushing open the dusty door, an Aston Martin DB5 sat parked there quietly. This car first appeared in the 1964 movie Goldfinger. The red ejection seat button on the car is the most original tribute to the classics. After a long night of travel, Bond drove to Skyfall Manor on the outskirts of England. This is Bond's hometown. At the age of 16, his parents died in a climbing accident. He became an orphan, and later, when he met M, he gradually became a special agent. Now the manor is in ruins. Only the elderly groundskeeper, Kincaid, is left to look after it. 3 months ago, after news of Bond faking his death spread, most of the furniture in the manor was sold. The only things that could be used against the enemy here were a few bundles of explosives and an old-fashioned double-barrel shotgun left by Bond's father. This gun requires manual reloading. Every time you shoot, you have to pull the hammer back. Even though the firepower is far inferior to modern guns, it is still effective in close-range defense. Kincaid also gave Bond a knife. The three people quickly divided tasks and arranged traps planted in the staircase, corridor, and garden of the manor. Tripwires connected to shotguns, hidden explosives behind doors, each design detail exuded the fierceness of a last stand. They silently waited for Silva to arrive. In the evening, Silva's vanguard arrived at the manor. Bond hid in the Aston Martin DB5. Waiting for the assassins to approach, he pressed the machine gun button behind the headlight. Bullets immediately poured out, leaving the enemy unable to react in time. Immediately afterwards, the assassins rushed into the manor, but repeatedly activated traps. Those who tripped on wires were shot with shotguns, and those who pushed open doors were hit with explosives. Just a moment later, this vanguard team was completely destroyed. But when Bond inspected the scene, he saw no sign of Silva. He knew the real threat was still behind. Suddenly, the sound of helicopter blades rang out in the distance. An armed helicopter pierced the night and swept over the manor. The bullets went through the walls, pieces of wood and rocks scattered everywhere. Bond immediately told Kincaid to take M and escape through a secret tunnel. But M had great difficulty walking. During the chaos, she was unfortunately hit by a bullet. Blood soaked her coat. Silva sat in the helicopter, thanks to the advantage in the air, completely overpowering Bond. He didn't stop bombing the manor. What made Bond even angrier was that after Silva got off the plane, he also ordered his subordinates to fire at the DB5. The beloved car, carrying classic memories of '07, was completely destroyed. Bond got angry, turned around, and rushed into the kitchen. He pulled out 2 gas cylinders, simply connected them, lit them, then ran like crazy toward the tunnel. The moment the gas tank exploded, debris flew and hit the helicopter pilot. The aircraft lost control and immediately crashed straight into the manor. In the fierce explosion, Skyfall Manor was completely destroyed. Fire lit up the night sky. Silva got up and glanced into the distance. He quickly saw a flashing flashlight, the trail left when Kincaid took M away. With murderous intent, he immediately chased after the light source. On the other side, Bond came out of the tunnel, and noticing M was in danger, risked his life to run toward the flashlight. But he was stopped by Silva's subordinates at an icy lake, and the two fought fiercely under the ice. Bond, thanks to his strong will, barely escaped danger. Silva finally found M in a small, dilapidated chapel. This was the moment he must have wished for. He stepped closer, his eyes filled with crazy obsession. Only she could do it. At that moment, a knife blade rushed straight into Silva's body. Bond promptly came to finish off this crazy villain. M leaned into Bond's arms and breathed weakly. Bond, who had always been steadfast, could no longer hold back his tears and let the sadness engulf him. Not long after, Bond returned to London. Eve gave him the small china dog statue from M's desk. This was something M had specifically left to M in her will. Eve guessed that perhaps M wanted him to find an office job and live out his days in peace. But Bond understood the meaning completely opposite. Entering the new office, Bond met the new M who had taken over, Mallory. Are you ready to return? The '07 movie Skyfall was released in the year 2012 and ultimately grossed $1.1 billion globally. Not only did it set a box office record for the '07 series, but it also became a benchmark for the spy movie genre at that time. Coincidentally, that year was the London Olympics. The scene of Bond and the Queen jumping into the opening ceremony made the influence of this classic IP reach an unprecedented level. The Skyfall plot pushed the character to the extreme. Bond's high-tech equipment was pitifully meager. Dr. Q even quipped, "Were you expecting an exploding pen? We don't really go in for that anymore." This detechnologized design further highlighted Bond's personal abilities. It is worth saying that M is truly the central female character. Previously, she was just the one giving tasks behind the scenes, but in this film, she is pushed to the front line. The relationship between her and Bond is more like that of mother and son. This emotional bond becomes the key to driving the plot. The construction of the villain Silva is the highlight of the film. His motive is not simply to destroy the world,
but to confront M. Some say the struggle between him and Bond is essentially a battle for a mother figure. He is like an abandoned child who just wants revenge on M, longing to be acknowledged by her. This personal motive has helped Silva escape the image of a one-dimensional villain. Plus Javier Bardem's delicate acting, this character has become one of the classic villains of the 007 series. It is precisely because of this formidable opponent that the confrontations between Bond and him are full of tension, creating a unique heroic drama. The value of a movie lies in its reputation, and the value of a movie review lies in its perception. With that, the 007 Skyfall movie ends here. If you like this movie, give me a like and a comment below. Goodbye, and see you again in the next recaps.